Cherokee Forest Horrors 3. Tales of Ancient Guardians. The sleeping bag lay empty, still warm from its occupant's body heat. No footprints led away from the camp. No branches were broken. Their friend had vanished into the ancient forest, as if he'd never existed at all. They had been warned. Growing up in a Cherokee family near the mountains of North Carolina, the elders taught them about things that lurked in the deep woods, things that predated even their oldest stories. The forest wasn't just trees and animals. It was alive in ways that modern people had forgotten. 3 red-painted stones marked the boundary of the forbidden area, arranged in a perfect triangle by ancestors whose names had been lost to time. That summer afternoon, 5 of them, 3 cousins and 2 friends from the local high school, stepped past those markers, ignoring generations of warnings. The temperature dropped instantly. Sarah's hand went to the medicine pouch at her neck. 7 generations of protection woven into its leather and beads. The forest floor, usually teeming with life, fell into an unnatural silence. "It's just stories," her cousin said, gripping his cedar walking stick tighter. "Tales to keep kids from wandering too far." But his voice wavered, betraying his uncertainty. They pressed deeper into the woods, where ancient pines grew so thick they blocked out the sun. Their footsteps, no matter how carefully placed, crunched loudly on the thick bed of pine needles. The trail behind them vanished, replaced by walls of vegetation that seemed to shift when no one was looking. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, they found it a perfect circle of standing stones, rising from the earth's. Strange symbols had been carved deep into their surfaces, symbols that seemed to move when viewed directly. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing against their skin like warm honey. Her cousin stepped toward the circle, as if pulled by invisible threads, his eyes glazing over as he stared at the symbols. "The stones, they're singing," he mumbled, his voice hollow and distant. "Can't you hear them?" Sarah grabbed his arm hard enough to leave marks. The medicine pouch at her neck grew hot, enough to burn through her shirt. Something moved in the shadows between the trees, something that bent the space around it, its form rippling like heat waves off summer asphalt. Night descended like a heavy blanket. They made camp beneath ancient hemlocks, whose trunks twisted together in impossible patterns. Despite years of camping experience, their fire refused to burn properly. The flames cast more shadows than light and gave no warmth against the unnatural cold. The forest seemed to breathe around them, massive trunks creaking like ribs, expanding and contracting. No stars penetrated the canopy above, creating a darkness so complete they couldn't see their hands in front of their faces. When the fire dimmed, "We shouldn't have come here," Sarah whispered, clutching her medicine pouch. "Grandmother said these woods belong to things older than our stories." The beads in her pouch clicked together of their own accord, spelling out rhythms that made no sense. Whispers floated through the camp, not from any of them, but from the darkness between the trees. They huddled closer to the fire, watching the shadows dance. None of them slept. How could they, when footsteps circled their camp all night? Despite the protective circle of blessed herbs Sarah had scattered. At some point, exhaustion finally overcame fear. One by one, they drifted into an easy sleep, all except her cousin, who sat staring into the darkness, mumbling words in a language none of them recognized. When they woke, their friend was gone. The ground where he had slept was unnaturally cold, frost spreading outward despite the summer heat. They searched everywhere, called his name until their voices grew hoarse, but found no trace. "We need to go back," her cousin said, his voice eerily calm. "The circle is calling us. It's the only way." His eyes were fever bright as he stared into the woods, seeing something the rest of them couldn't. The trees seemed to press closer, the air growing colder with each passing moment. Something was coming, they could feel it. In the way the shadows thickened and pulled around their feet. In the way the forest's whispers grew more urgent with each passing moment. They found themselves back at the stone circle, though none of them remembered choosing that direction. The ancient monoliths looked different now, taller somehow, their shadows stretching impossibly long across the clearing. The symbols carved into their surfaces seemed more distinct, pulsing with a faint luminescence that hadn't been there before. Sarah's medicine pouch grew increasingly hot. until it finally burst open, scattering sacred herbs and blessed beads across the forest floor. The air crackled with static electricity, making their hair stand on end. "We have to listen," her cousin said, walking toward the circle's center. His movements had become strange, disconnected. "They've always been here before the Cherokee. Before the first people, this is their place." Sarah reached for his arm, but he pulled away. The air around him seemed to ripple and distort, like looking through water. That's when they saw it. A figure standing on the other side of the clearing. It was tall to be human, and wrapped in what looked like living shadows. They didn't wait to see what it would do. Grabbing her cousin, they ran. The forest seemed to twist around them, trees bending in impossible ways. Their screams echoed back at strange angles, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Somehow, after what felt like hours, they stumbled out onto a road. They were half crazy with exhaustion and fear, but they were alive, all except their friend, who was never found. The authorities searched for weeks, saying he probably got lost or fell, but they knew the truth: the forest had taken him, just like it had taken others before the elder. Stories weren't just warnings, they were records of what happened when people ventured too deep, disturbed things that should have been left alone. Her cousin was never the same after that night. Something fundamental had changed in him, as if a part of his soul had been left behind. In those dark woods, he grew quiet, withdrawn, spending long hours staring into nothing. Late at night, Sarah would hear him whispering to himself, in that strange language, the one he'd spoken near the stone circle. The words made no sense, but they seemed to carry weight, making the air heavy and still whenever he spoke them. He moved away the following spring, as far from the mountains as he could get. Sometimes Sarah wondered if he ever truly escaped, or if the forest's influence followed him. As for her, she never returned to that part of the woods. She stayed close to the marked trails now, and always left offerings before entering the forest. Small bundles of tobacco and sage, placed with prayers of respect and remembrance. The old stories her grandparents told them weren't just tales to frighten children. They were truth, passed down through generations to keep them safe. There were things in those woods, things older than human memory. They didn't think like humans did. They didn't want what humans wanted. Most importantly, they didn't like being disturbed. If anyone ever found themselves in a place that felt wrong, where the air grew too still, where the trees seemed to watch their every move, where silence fell like a heavy blanket, they should leave. Don't question it. Don't try to understand it. Just go. Sarah learned that lesson the hard way. Paid for it with her friend's life and her cousin's peace of mind. The deep woods held secrets that were never meant for human knowing. Some boundaries existed for a reason, marked by stones painted red and stories passed down through time. The forest remembered, the forest waited. And sometimes on dark nights, when the wind blew just right, Sarah heard whispers from the direction of those ancient stones. Whispers in a language she prayed she'd never understand. The deep woods held many secrets, and the tale of the vanishing friend was but one of many strange occurrences. In Cherokee lands as autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, another story emerged from these ancient forests. One that spoke of an even older guardian, a being that had watched over sacred grounds since time immemorial. The elders called it Octana, the great serpent, and its tale would prove no less chilling than the first. The great serpent's scales glimmered like raindrops on polished stone as it moved through the shadows. 7 feet of muscled coils rippled beneath iridescent armor that had witnessed centuries pass. Its eyes, deep as mountain pools, and just as ancient, held the power to stop a man's heart with a single glance. This was Octana, the guardian of sacred places, whose legend had been passed down through 7 generations of Cherokee storytellers. The elder's hands trembled as he traced the serpent's form in the air, his voice dropping to a whisper that made the flames dance. "The forest remembers," he said, weathered fingers gripping his grandson's shoulder. "It remembers every footstep, every breath, every drop of blood spilled upon its soil. Octana is its voice, its guardian, its warning." The boy who heard this tale that night would grow up to learn its truth firsthand years later. near the edge of the Appalachian Mountains, where his family had lived for 12 generations, he would face something that made him question everything he thought he knew about the old stories. The forest stretched before him, ancient trees rising like silent sentinels into the morning mist, their bark black as coal and twisted with age, bore witness to centuries of secrets. This was no tourist trail. This was the deep woods, where the old powers still held sway. His cousin's laughter echoed unnaturally in the heavy air. Come on. Don't tell me you actually believe those stories about spirit guardians. Dry leaves crunched beneath careless feet as he forged ahead, ignoring the way the birds had fallen silent, the way the shadows seemed to thicken with each step. The morning sun, which should have been climbing toward noon, seemed unable to penetrate the canopy. Massive hemlocks and oaks wove their branches together, overhead creating a twilight, realm where time moved differently. The temperature dropped with each step, their breath forming clouds despite the summer heat. After 3 hours of hiking, they found the ruins. Stone foundations emerged from the earth like ancient bones, covered in moss thick enough to sink to inches deep. The remains of what might have been a village, or something older, something that predated even the oldest Cherokee settlements in these mountains. The ruins formed a perfect circle, 37 feet in diameter. At its center stood what appeared to be an altar stone, its surface carved with symbols that seemed to shift. When viewed directly, the air here felt thick, pressed against their skin, like honey left too long in the cold. "We shouldn't be here," he whispered, the words forming frost in the air. "This is one of the places grandfather warned us about, the sacred grounds." His cousin ignored the warning, moving between the stone foundations. With reckless curiosity, "Look at this. These carvings must be hundreds of years old." His voice echoed strangely, as if the ruins themselves were capturing and twisting the sound. The forest had fallen completely silent. No wind stirred the leaves, no insects chirped in the underbrush. The only sound was their breathing and the slow, deliberate movement of something massive, circling the ruins. Each footfall sent vibrations through the earth, though nothing could be seen through the thick vegetation. The temperature plummeted. Further frost began forming on the moss-covered stones. Despite the summer afternoon, the shadows between the trees deepened, moved in ways shadows shouldn't move. "Jake," he called out, using his cousin's name for the first time in the telling. "We need to leave now." But Jake stood transfixed before the altar stone, his hand reaching out to touch its surface. The moment his fingers made contact, every bird within a mile took flight at once. Their wings created a thunder that shook leaves from the trees. The air grew heavy with the scent of rain on stone, though the sky remained hidden above the canopy. Then they saw it, a figure that seemed to emerge from the shadows themselves. It stood 12 feet tall, its form rippling like heat waves off summer asphalt. But where heat waves distorted light upward, these distortions moved sideways, twisting reality in impossible ways. Jake stood frozen, his hands still touching the altar stone. His eyes had gone glassy, reflecting something only he could see. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made the ground tremble. "They've always been here," he whispered in a voice that wasn't quite his own. "The guardians, the watchers, the ones who remember." The figure moved closer each step, leaving frost patterns in the shape of ancient symbols. The air grew so cold it burned their lungs. Reality seemed to bend around the being trees, warping and stretching in its wake. "I see now," Jake continued, his words creating visible ripples in the air. "I understand what grandfather meant about respect, about remembering." About his words cut off as the figure raised what might have been an arm. The shadows around it deepened, took on forms that hurt the eyes to look at directly. Patterns emerged in the darkness, scales that shimmered like rain on stone, coils that moved with liquid grace. The stories had been true, all of them. Uktana wasn't just a legend, passed down through generations. It was here, had always been here, watching from the shadows between worlds. Terror finally broke through the trance. They ran crashing through underbrush, feeling the presence behind them, getting closer with each step. The forest itself seemed to come alive around them, branches reaching like grasping hands, roots rising to trip their feet. Jake stumbled, fell when his cousin grabbed his arm to pull him up. A jolt like ice water shot through both of them. Jake's skin had grown cold as stone, his eyes still reflecting impossible things. Somehow they made it out, stumbling onto familiar trails as the sun began to set, but the forest had marked them both. Jake never spoke of what he saw at the altar stone, what visions had filled his mind in that moment of contact. He withdrew from family gatherings, spent long hours staring into the distance. Sometimes late at night his cousin would hear him, speak in a language that made the air grow heavy and cold. Words that sounded like rain on stone, like scales sliding through shadow. The grandfather listened to their story in silence, nodding as if he had expected this all along. The Nanahi, he said finally, the spirit people. They are the guardians of sacred places, the protectors of boundaries between worlds. Octana is their voice, their warning, to those who would disturb what should be left at peace. Jake moved away the following spring, as far from the mountains as he could get. But distance didn't seem to matter. The forest had touched something inside him, awakened an awareness that couldn't be shut off. His cousin stayed, but never returned to the deep woods. He kept to marked trails, always carried offerings of tobacco and cornmeal. The land had taught him respect, in ways no story ever could. Years passed sometimes. On nights when the moon is dark and the wind carries the scent of rain on stone, he thinks he sees movement in the shadows, coils that shimmer with an inner light, eyes deep as mountain pools. The ancient guardians still walk those shadowed paths, Octana among them, its scales shimmering like rain on stone, eyes deep as mountain pools. They remained as they had always been, the land's memory, its voice. Its warning to those who would disturb what was meant to stay at rest. The mysteries of the Cherokee lands ran deeper than ancient guardians in the forest. While Octana watched over sacred grounds below, other entities kept their vigil from above. The elders spoke of the Anunnaki, the star people who had watched over these mountains since time immemorial. Their story, no less remarkable than the tale of the serpent guardian, emerged during a late summer night in 2019. When the barrier between their world and ours grew unexpectedly thin. The campfire cast orange light across 7 faces, gathered deep in the North Carolina mountains, 23 miles from the nearest marked trail. The flames reflected in Marcus's eyes as he spoke of things he'd seen in these woods, things that defied modern explanation. The old stories aren't just stories, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The usually quiet 19-year-old's words carried weight that made the others lean in closer. The Ananuas still watch. I've seen their lights. The others exchanged skeptical glances, marshmallows forgotten on their sticks. Marcus had always been the serious one, the keeper of old ways in their generation. While others rushed to embrace the modern world, he spent hours with the elders, learning stories passed down through 14 generations of Cherokee storytellers. The night air hung thick and still, unseasonably warm for late August. No wind stirred the leaves of ancient oaks that had stood sentinel over this land since before European contact. The forest stretched vast and dark around their small clearing, a protected site that had belonged to their family for 7 generations. At precisely 11:47 p.m., the crickets fell silent. Their sudden quiet hit like a physical force, making the hair rise on 6 sets of arms. The fire's crackle seemed to dim, though the flames burned just as bright there. Marcus whispered, pointing toward the star-filled sky. Watch a single point of light, moved against the backdrop of fixed stars, not the steady blink of aircraft, or the predictable arc of satellites. This light glided with purpose, stopping and starting with impossible precision. It traced a path exactly 37 degrees above the horizon, measured later by astronomical software. The temperature dropped 12 degrees in less than a minute. Breath formed clouds in the suddenly chilled air as a second light appeared, then a third. They moved in perfect synchronization, maintaining exactly 47 feet of separation between them, as measured against known star positions. The star people. Marcus breathed, his voice carrying that same weight of ancient knowledge. The Anunnaki they've chosen to show themselves. The lights performed an impossible dance across the sky, moving with fluid grace that denied all known laws of physics. They stopped instantaneously, changed direction at perfect right angles, then accelerated faster than any human aircraft could achieve. Sarah, the group's resident skeptic, reached for her phone to record the phenomenon. The device powered down instantly, its screen crystallizing with frost despite the warm night air. 3 other phones and 2 cameras suffered the same fate within seconds. The air grew heavier still, pressing against their skin like water at depths. Static electricity made their hair stand on end. The fire dimmed to blue flames that gave no heat, then extinguished completely despite the dry wood and still air. "Don't move," Marcus warned, as the others stirred restlessly. "Don't speak, they're not here for us to study them. They're studying us." The presence above felt ancient beyond measure, aware in ways that transcended human understanding. These were not visitors from distant stars, as modern UFO enthusiasts might imagine. They were the original watchers, beings that had observed these mountains since the first Cherokee walked these lands. The lights converged directly overhead, forming an equilateral triangle 17 degrees across time. Seemed to stretch and warp around them. Later they would discover that, while the experience felt like hours,